There's a silence that doesn't echo, it devours. It enters quietly, like smoke, and wraps itself around your voice until you forget how it once felt to be heard. Not by others, but by the sacred thread within you. And when they left without warning, without weight, you didn't just lose a person. You lost a version of yourself that thought love meant staying. But what if I told you, they didn't leave because you were too much? They left because you were a mirror. And the light you carried, it made them see everything they hadn't dared face, not your darkness, their own. So they vanished, not because you weren't worthy, but because you were dangerous to their sleep. You were never abandoned. You were being initiated, not into loneliness, but into truth, not into emptiness, but into essence. And yes, it hurt, of course it did. Initiation always feels like betrayal, until you realize it was never meant to soothe you. It came to strip you. Initiation is sacred cruelty. It finds the part of you still begging to be chosen, and places her in front of a door, one that no one else can open. Only your tears. Only your surrender. Only the howl you've kept hidden behind your ribcage. This is the moment the archetype awakens. Not the lover, not the daughter, not the nice girl, but the oracle, the one who rises not because she was saved, but because she remembered what she came here to become. So, if you're standing at the edge hollowed out, grieving, quiet, that's the threshold, that's the altar, that's the place where your soul begins to speak in the language only initiates understand. There comes a moment when the soul stops pretending, when the smile becomes too heavy, when the silence becomes too loud, and the body, your sacred animal, starts aching in places where touch can't reach. It's not depression. It's not weakness. It is the threshold where your spirit refuses to wear masks that no longer fit the shape of your becoming. You feel it in the in-between spaces, the hallway between what was and what will be. People still speak to you, but their words feel like dust. The world continues, yet it feels like you've stepped out of time. This isn't a breakdown, it's the old scaffolding of who you thought you were is being dismantled by something holy. And it feels like grief. Because it is. You're not just grieving a person. You're grieving the identity that clung to them. The version of you who thought love had to be earned. Who believed absence meant unworthiness. Who kept shrinking so others could stay. But now the sacred wound is open, and you can't go back. Not to smallness, not to pretending, not to the soft cages you once called comfort. Every initiation begins with a descent, a fall from the known into the unknowable. It mimics abandonment so precisely you think the divine has left you, too. But the truth is far more mystical. The soul retreats the loudest when it is about to roar. And in this darkness, a new name begins to form inside your bones. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world taught you how to disappear. The pain you feel now is a sacred excavation pulling up the roots of false worth, tearing down the altars built to external love. So what's left is raw, pure, yours, not borrowed, not conditional. And yes, it's terrifying. Of course it is. Because the ego mourns what the soul celebrates. But trust this. What you're walking through isn't exile. It's initiation into a deeper belonging than you've ever known. There is a kind of pain that doesn't scream, it hums. A low, ancient vibration beneath the chest, like a song you didn't know you remembered. It comes not to harm, but to awaken. Because buried inside every heartbreak is a hidden temple where your soul left offerings, waiting for you to return. The sacred wound is not your enemy, it's your oracle. It holds the parts of you that broke quietly when no one was watching. When you still thought survival meant silence, and though the world told you to move on, to let go, your body knew better. It kept the ache alive not to torture you, but to make sure you never forgot what still needed to be retrieved. There is a memory older than this life, a pattern you didn't choose but you inherited, repetition that feels personal, but is ancestral. You are not just healing your wound, you were breaking spells cast generations ago. You were the one chosen to return light to a lineage wrapped in forgetting. That's why it hurt so deeply, because you were feeling for all the ones who never could. The wound does not want to be erased, it wants to be honored. It wants to be seen as the sacred portal it always was, a rite disguised as rupture, a calling disguised as chaos. It is not asking you to suffer. It is asking you to remember who you were before the wound, and who you must now become because of it. This is the moment when the soul begins to reclaim itself, not through fixing, not through forgetting, but through feeling, fully, ritually, without apology. The pain no longer is proof of weakness, but as confirmation of your depth. And the wound, no longer a scar but a map, Let it speak now. Let it sing, weep, ache, rise. You are not falling apart. You are falling into alignment with the truth. You were not abandoned. You were cracked open so you could finally hear your soul whisper back. What they took wasn't just their presence. It was the reflection you saw in their eyes. The way they looked at you as if you mattered, as if your light didn't blind, but baptized. And when they disappeared, they didn't just leave you alone. They left you questioning if you were ever real at all. This is the cruel beauty of absence. It shows you everything that was never truly there. Not to punish, but to purify, to strip away illusion, layer by layer, until only the unshakable remains. You begin to see, they didn't love you. They loved what they could take from your radiance without being asked to carry its weight. You weren't too much. You were a mirror, a soul-shaped reflection, too honest to distort, and that terrifies those who haven't met themselves. You held up the truth, and truth is sharp. Not all hearts are ready to bleed in its presence, so they call you intense, dramatic, complicated, when in truth, you were simply awake. There is a loneliness that only the awake know. It doesn't come from being unloved, but from seeing too clearly. You walk into rooms and feel what isn't said. You look at smiles and hear the ghosts behind them, and your presence becomes uncomfortable for those still bargaining with their own shadow. But here's the truth they could never say aloud. Your depth exposed their surface. Your silence confronted their noise. Your devotion made their performance unbearable. You did not lose them. You revealed them. And in doing so, you revealed yourself. So now, in the echo of their leaving, you stand not as a victim, but as a vessel, a keeper of the sacred mirror, one that no longer needs to be held in someone else's hands. Because now, you see yourself. And that seeing is the beginning of everything, holy. There is a particular ache that comes when you realize you've been betraying yourself in the name of being loved. You stayed too long in rooms where your spirit couldn't breathe. You whispered when you wanted to scream. You gave when you were empty, and you called that devotion. But it wasn't love, it was exile. Somewhere along the way, you learned that to belong, you had to disappear, dim your joy, soften your edges, swallow your knowing. You became fluent in self-abandonment, a master of sensing what others needed while forgetting the sacred language of your own desire. You made yourself a home for everyone, except yourself. This is the consequence of a world that rewards compliance and fears wildness, especially in a woman, especially in one who remembers. Because a woman who remembers her essence, her rage, her beauty, her standards, cannot be controlled. And so you were taught to fear your own power by those who feared theirs. But exile, too, is a teacher. It shows you who you are when there's no one to impress, no one to save, no masks to maintain. It forces you into a sacred solitude where your truth can speak without interruption. And though it feels like punishment, it's actually preparation, the kind that burns away everything false. In this space, you don't just grieve what left. You grieve the self that tolerated its absence. You mourn the woman who accepted crumbs and called it a feast, who made palaces out of cages and poetry out of pain. She is awakening, and the exile is ending, because the soul, once remembered, does not return gently. It floods, it reclaims, it resurrects every part of you that was silenced in the name of survival. And as you rise, you realize the one you were waiting for was the woman you had buried beneath politeness. There is a self beneath the silence, not the self shaped by approval, but the one forged in intuition, thunder, and flame. She is the wild, one untamed, unashamed, who never bowed to fear until the world taught her to. And now, in the ashes of abandonment, she begins to stir. Not in anger, but in remembering. The wild self doesn't speak the language of perfection. She speaks in instinct, in sensation, in the rhythm of a body no longer willing to betray itself. She remembers the moon, the blood, the ancient drum that pulsed through your grandmother's bones. She is older than culture, deeper than shame, and every tear you shed has been loosening the lock on the door that holds her. You silenced her for love. You dimmed her for peace. You tucked her away so you wouldn't be called too much, too intense, too emotional. But too much for who? Too much for what? The wild self is only too much for cages, and you were never meant to live in one. She doesn't want revenge. She wants restoration. She wants you to walk into a room and no longer shrink, to ask for what you desire without apology, to say no without guilt, and yes without fear, to wear your wholeness like skin and polished, unfiltered, sacred. This resurrection isn't loud, it's embodied. It shows in the way you breathe deeper, Speak slower. Choose solitude over noise. Truth over approval. It's not about proving anything. It's about becoming again. Becoming the you that was never broken, only buried. So if you feel her rising, let her. Don't ask if it's safe. Don't wait for permission. This is the return of your original self. The one you were before you were told who to be. And she does not ask to be accepted. She remembers that she already belongs. There is a sacred intelligence inside emptiness. It feels hollow at first, like something is missing, like a part of you was stolen when they walked away. What feels like absence is space, and space is where new life whispers, not as noise, but as knowing. We've been taught to fear the void, to fill it with distractions, people, noise, because in stillness, the soul speaks truths the ego isn't ready to hear, but the brave ones you'll learn to listen. To sit inside the hollowness and let it teach you how to feel without flinching, how to stay without saving, how to receive without reaching. Emptiness is not the absence of worth. It is the womb of rebirth. It is the holy pause between what ended and what is emerging. And in that pause, your old self dissolves. The one who loved from fear, the one who begged to be chosen, the one who believed survival required shrinking, let her fall. She was never meant to carry your becoming. The alchemy begins here. In the quiet, in the moments where nothing makes sense. And yet, something deeper than logic begins to grow. A root system forming in the dark. A new voice echoing through your ribs. I am still here, and you are not broken. You are being restructured. You are not empty. You are being cleared. So what enters next will not replicate the past, but meet you in your wholeness. And your stillness is the invitation. Trust the silence, not as punishment, but as prophecy. You are not waiting. You are just the version of you that rises next will be untouchable, not because she hides, but because she finally belongs to herself. There is a voice inside you that was silenced before it ever spoke. It wasn't because it was wrong. It was because it was right. Too precise, too ancient. And it frightened those who needed you small to feel secure. So you buried it, not because you lacked power, but because you loved peace more than truth. But now, the voice is returning, not as a whisper, but as a pulse, a throb beneath the skin, a knowing that cannot be reasoned away. It speaks in fragments at first. No more pretending, no more shrinking, no more self-betrayal disguised as kindness. This is not anger. This is reclamation. The inner oracle does not negotiate. She doesn't ask if it's convenient. She arrives when you've suffered long enough under the weight of false lives. She wears no mask. She's not polite. She is the bone-deep truth. You buried beneath the need to be loved. And now she rises, not to destroy, but to rebuild. You begin to trust again. Not others, but yourself. Your body becomes compass. Your emotion becomes gospel. Your intuition becomes law. You stop asking for signs, because you are the sign. You stop searching for permission because your presence is already permission enough. This is the rebirth of sovereignty, not as rebellion, but as remembrance. You remember that your soul came here with contracts, sacred agreements etched in stardust and blood, and no abandonment, no betrayal, no vanishing love can alter what your essence came to fulfill, not even your own forgetting. So you listen, you speak, you walk where your feet once trembled, because now the voice within is louder than the noise around you. And when the oracle speaks, even silence obeys. After awakening, you no longer love the same way, not because you're colder, but because you're clearer. You no longer mistake chemistry for connection, attention for devotion, or longing for alignment. Your standards become sacred, not selective, because now you know what your soul costs, and you refuse to be sold at a discount. This is where power begins to hum softly beneath your skin, not as force, but as frequency. You don't chase, convince, or beg. You observe, and what cannot meet you in presence, you release in peace. Not because you're heartless, but because you've finally healed the part of you that thought love had to be earned through You stop auditioning for roles you were never meant to play. The cool girl, the fixer, the understanding one. You realize that being deeply seen is far more nourishing than being superficially loved. You don't want anyone true, and if it takes solitude to protect that truth, so be it. Your loneliness is no longer empty. It's sacred space. You begin to draw boundaries not as walls, but as invitations for reciprocity. You say no with softness, but with certainty. You choose people who choose your depth, who bow to your mystery, who aren't afraid of the parts you once hid, because now, hiding is betrayal. and you are done betraying yourself. You begin to glow differently, not from validation, but from alignment. You wear your standards like skin, not negotiable, not performative, but alive. Each one a prayer, each one a portal to a life that mirrors your becoming. Because when you awaken, you don't just change how you love, you change what you allow, and every no you speak now echoes back in the language of self-respect, self-resonance, and sacred reclamation. There comes a moment when the ache no longer owns you. It still lives in your bones, yes, but now it hums like a prayer, not a wound. You no longer flinch at your memories, you honor them. You bless the places where you bled because they became the soil of your rebirth. You've moved from surviving the pain to alchemizing it. You start to walk differently, slower, more deliberate, as if the earth beneath you recognizes your steps, because it does. You are no longer running from yourself. You are returning to yourself, and every breath is a homecoming, every moment a mirror that confirms you are not what you lost. You are what remained. Integration is not loud. It's not a firework, it's a fire. The steady kind. The kind that warms everything you touch, because you've touched your own ashes. And now, when people ask what happened to you, you smile. Because how do you explain that silence broke you just to teach you how to listen? You begin to carry your story like a sacred scroll, not to prove, not to impress, but to transmit. Because now you speak from the wound healed, not the wound still bleeding. And others feel it. They feel your frequency. Not because you're perfect, but because you are true. You see others differently now, too. You recognize the ones still hiding, still aching. And you don't try to fix them, you witness them. Because that's what you craved the most when you were breaking. Not a solution, but someone to hold space for your becoming. And now, you become that someone. Not by effort, but by embodiment. The one who walks softly, but leaves tremors in the ground. The one who doesn't chase light, because she is the lantern. And now you stand at the edge of everything you used to be. Not broken, not bitter branded by truth. You carry the scar not as shame, but as scripture. Because what abandoned you didn't destroy you. It delivered you. To yourself. To your soul. To the quiet kingdom within that no one else could ever access but you. What once felt like silence was actually the sound of your essence returning. Slowly. Fiercely. Without apology. You no longer crave what left. You understand why it had to. Some doors are slammed by grace, disguised as grief. And in their closing, your true life began. You don't walk as you did before. Now your steps are prayers. Now your gaze is fire. Now your heart is no longer a hostage. It is a sovereign temple where only those who remember the sacred may enter. You are no longer a seeker of love. You are a sanctuary for it. And to the version of you who weighed it, wept, and withered, you did not fail. You fulfilled. You did not lose time. You sanctified it. Because what felt like delay was the divine rearranging everything to match the frequency of your becoming. So now, when love returns, and it will, you'll recognize it not by how it touches your skin, but by how it honors your silence. How it kneels at the altar of your essence without asking you to shrink. And you'll no longer be chosen by those who come and go. Because now, you choose. From a place the past cannot touch. You were not abandoned. You were being initiated. And now, you are the initiation. If this voice found you in your silence, it's because your soul was ready to remember. You weren't just watching a video. You were hearing the echo of your own becoming. So let it continue. Let this frequency stay close. Tap subscribe not to follow, but to return to yourself again and again. Touch the bell not for updates, but to be reminded, when you forget, that you were never abandoned. You are becoming the altar, and when the world gets loud again, you'll know where to come back to. Right here, right now, right home.